Hello, everyone. Hello, Jenny. How are you?
Hi, Lori. I'm pretty good today. How
Oh,
about you?
good. Well, it's a beautiful, lovely spring day, and we are here to talk about the first of two Capricorn full moons.
Hmm.
Before we get into talking about that, thank you all for being here. And if you're new to our channel, my name's Laurie, and you can find me at lauriefarrington.com and on all the social media sites. There'll be links below. And Jenny, my good friend Jenny, is of hiddenpathastrology.com, and you can find all of her information below as well. We both do consultations. We both do teaching or mentoring, and go to our websites. Take advantage of the work that we do, and yeah, contact us for consultations. That's what we're both really passionate about doing. And Jenny and I, together as a combination, we call ourselves Astropath. So thank you for being here. Follow us and like
Hmm.
us, and leave comments. Now, we're going to ask Jenny to tell us about the moon phases.
Yes, so what we are talking about today is the Capricorn full moon, as you mentioned, the first of two. So this one's happening very early in Capricorn at only 1 degree. And it is happening, let's see, June 21st at 9:08 p.m. Eastern. So that's just one day out into Cancer season. So Cancer season begins and wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, we have a Capricorn full moon like right away. So that's what the focus of this video is. Let's talk a little bit about the moon phase cycle. Just bearing in mind that the full moon is the culmination of the cycle. I guess it's really the midpoint, if you will. When you think about the whole cycle, you start at the new moon, which is about 2 weeks beforehand. In this case, we had our new moon on June 6th at 16 degrees of Gemini. So we have a Gemini beginning to the cycle, which brings in the intellect and the idea of the mindset and pointing your mind in a direction for what you want to accomplish. And then now here at the full moon in Capricorn, we're on the accomplished part
Mhm.
because Capricorn is a lot about those sorts of themes. And then there's also a way of using these cycles for the whole 6 month time period
Mhm.
as well. And so if you're interested in that, you're going to want to think back to January 11th, where we had the Capricorn New Moon at about 20 degrees of Capricorn. So that gives the 6 month cycle. Sometimes that's just a more helpful cycle to think about as human beings. So think back to whatever happened sometime after the holidays, what comes to mind, and then we'll get more into specific topics when we talk about the personal impacts. So anyway, that's what we're talking about, the full moon. Once this full moon hits, then you have the whole second half of the cycle, the waning half, as the moon gets darker and darker and darker again. And it lasts about 2 more weeks until you have the next new moon. So that's kind of just a quick synopsis of the cycle, and some of the topics we're looking at with this full moon. And I will just add, we will be making a second Capricorn full moon video that happens at the very end. I think it is at 29 degrees of Capricorn. So funny to think about the season really bookended by these two full moons. It really presents a nice framework to think about what have you come in with during this
Mhm.
Cancer season, which focuses so much on the power of your feelings and dealing with your vulnerability, and then coming to the end of the season and having to take another look about how you've been responsible for that kind of unfoldment of your emotional stuff. So we'll get more into that as we go, but that's kind of a synopsis.
Mhm.
Do you have anything you want to add, Lori, or to the cycles?
Yeah, I don't think so. It's really fun to watch the cycles as they unfold, and really paying attention to, just the whole idea that at the new moon you plant a seed and it illuminates at the full moon. And I really like working with the longer cycles, because the short cycles just, they pass by so quickly. It's hard to pay attention like you can with the longer cycle. And if you think back on that middle of January, what began then that now is being illuminated. at this this full moon. It's really a nice way to watch the cycles change and to kind of, build our plans in that regard. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing Lori and I talk a lot about, we really want to make sure you get is it depends on your natal chart. If you have important points in early cardinal signs, so we're talking Capricorn, Aries, Libra, Cancer, those are the 4 cardinal signs. If you have, strong planets there or your sun, moon there or something else there, this is more likely to have a bigger impact on you. And it's really great to kind of look at the whole year and figure out which lunations are the most important for you personally. And we really, really encourage that. We're both natal astrologers and that really want you to, use the most useful tools that we can offer you. So make sure you have your own chart handy and that you have a sense of, what might be at those early points of cardinal signs.
Yeah. And I'd really encourage people, when you listen to our videos, have your chart in front of you. And we recommend that you use whole sign house system. If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. If you do, you do. And, it works so much. All of the house systems that people use work. It's a different filters. But it's easier to kind of follow along if you're using the same one that we're using as we're talking about it.
Yeah, it really works well with how we do this. So, yep. Cool.
Okay, so what we want to talk about next is Capricorn. What is Capricorn about? Capricorn's an important sign to understand here at this full moon. Capricorn is the cardinal earth sign, and it is ruled by Saturn. It is a very serious sign. So we can say that about it easily. It's a very serious sign. It's really it's the sign that really pushes us to work hard, take responsibility, have a high level of integrity, and be accountable for our actions.
No problem.
No problem.
I think there's a lot of lack of that, I think, in this world in general at the moment. But so very important for each of us to pay attention and tune into what we're responsible for. That's a lot of what we'll focus on in the individual impacts. And think about that for yourself, right?
Yeah. And one of the things, with Saturn being the ruler of Capricorn, I think a lot about that whole kind of adage people would talk about around, you're old when you're young and you're young when you're old. There's sort of that sense with Capricorn that, it takes a long time to face our responsibilities and to kind of welcome them. I guess I could say that, when we're young, we kind of struggle against authority and we struggle against ourselves in large part. And as we get older, we kind of, things change and we're more willing to understand the gifts that come with responsibility.
That's a great point because I was thinking, I don't know, I think that at its core, conflict is ultimately inner conflict. And the degree to which you fight yourself and you battle against your own sense of inner authority is really what's going on when you're in these deep conflicts. And as you age, you just start to understand that. And like you said, you start to welcome some of the responsibilities, because they provide a lot of gravitas. They give you something to stand on. They let you see like how you can create support in your life, and this taking responsibility is ultimately something that you really want to do because with that responsibility also comes, personal power
And freedom.
and that's, details. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, but I also want to note too that all of these things come on a spectrum. I always think about everything being on a spectrum with these signs and so on. And in this case, like Capricorn, when it's pretty out of balance, it is a curmudgeon. It can be a grumpy old man who just wants to be left alone.
Oh, you did that good, Jenny.
I know. There's a Capricorn somewhere. But that is the, part of it. And on the harder end, there's definitely a need for solitude that comes with Capricorn. Like there's definitely a need to be able to turn inward so you understand who you are at a core level in order for you to be able to then turn out and be the authority without being a dictator, I mean, be the authority without like just being a boss that doesn't give a crap about anybody's feelings. Like that's part of the darker part of it. In the positive, there is no better sign that can get stuff done. I mean, Capricorn, I always think about, can move a mountain. It will move a mountain. It will move mountains. But it will do it slowly. It will do it with a plan. It will delegate. It will get help. It'll create a whole structure. It has to do the internal rumination to create the blueprint before it is then ready to orchestrate. And so that is a long, slow process. So there's a slowness to Capricorn. There's a having to do your due diligence, a need to be persistent, and a need to be patient in order to execute these things. So yeah, that's just a little descriptor that I think
Yeah, and it's really a fascinating sign. And I think, anybody with a strong Capricorn component in their charts, especially people with Capricorn rising, there's so much of that as they get older, Capricorn is so sensitive because it's ruled by Saturn, and Saturn is the planet of time. Time is really a gift for Capricorn because, if you know people with really strong Capricorn components, they tend to have a lot of difficulty in their younger years. And then as they get older, they really do settle in because they've done that year after year, that diligent work and effort, and can relax, and because they can rest on the fruit of all those labors. They've set in the structure that can support the years ahead.
Yeah.
It's a good sign.
Yeah. And I mean, I think we should get into the chart, but it is not the easiest for the moon to be in Capricorn in a natal chart. And even in this time frame, it may be best to spend time on your own during a Capricorn full moon, because it kind of illuminates the part of your life where you need to do some solo acts. You need to kind of take a breather and withdraw. I mean, it is also the place you have to step into authority, but in order to do that, you've got to do the inner stuff. So when we talk about mundane astrology and we talk about what this full moon is illuminating, it's showing you that area of your life that contains that seriousness. So
yeah, and the whole issue of being alone, spending time alone with Capricorn is so important. And the only other thing I wanted to add to that is, you think about the mountain goat. When that goat is climbing those mountains, it's not holding hands with its partner. It's on its own. Otherwise, it's going to tumble off the mountain. And there is so much of the kind of authoritative effort that Capricorn has to put in, that Capricorn has to be on its own. So there is so much that solitude teaches Capricorn.
Yeah.
So
I think so. Okay.
yeah,
Let's
open up the chart.
Yeah.
See what it looks like. There we have it.
Yeah.
And there's not a mountain goat, but there's the sea goat. What's the difference between, what do you think about? I grew up with astrology thinking about mountain goats.
I think
I
love the sea goat.
I
Well,
love
first
the image of the sea goat, but I don't really
I
understand.
know.
Do you?
I really like this picture. Yes, I do. I really like the sea goat because it brings a little bit of a mystical element, which is not what you normally think about with Capricorn. And it's the mysticism is tied in with the fact that the fish's tail allows the Capricorn to swim, or allows the goat to also swim down to the bottom of where the base of the mountain is. So I think it's a symbol for being able to go down deep, even into the ocean, to understand the depth of where the base of the mountain is, and then it can swim back up and then climb up to the very peak. And so it's a statement about its breadth. It's a statement about that it can go way down into the crust of the earth, and then way up to the top to where the clouds are thin. So it has a lot of capacity. This sign has a ton of capacity.
Huh.
So that's what I think of.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm glad that came up because I don't think I ever really realized where the sea goat idea came from, but I love that image. So there you have it. Okay, so the first thing I want to mention with this chart is this. Okay, so here we've got the full moon. But the thing to notice is, yeah, it's at 1 degree Capricorn. That is the cardinal point. And the cardinal point in astrology is the point of action. An action must be taken. So there's that's kind of interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that does is it makes a statement about this full moon being very public.
Very
So that means, pay attention outside of yourself to see what goes on in society and in the culture, as well as paying attention to what shows up in your own life. Like what becomes really prominent in your own life in this moment is showing up at this
Yeah. And the
a cardinal.
prominence has gotta be somewhere in that realm of what is your responsibility and what's your responsibility to your own vulnerability.
Right, because the part of this the equation you need to understand is we are in Cancer season. So in
Right.
mundane astrology, the sun is in Cancer, and you really do have Mercury and Venus pretty tightly to the sun in this case too. So those three things together represent the power of your vulnerability. And that's how the picture we kind of painted in the Cancer season video. But just that need to understand, the strength that comes from understanding your vulnerability, from holding that space, from being willing to show up in your life, even with that vulnerability. I mean, there's an enormous amount of power to
Mm.
that. And this particular Cancer season has a lot of flow to it. So, this full moon, right at the beginning of the season, is establishing kind of a benchmark of taking responsibility for your feelings, taking
Yeah.
responsibility for knowing them, for looking at them, for being with them.
Yeah.
I think that's, in the simplest way, that's the first statement it's making.
Yeah. It's really
Mhm,
interesting, Cancer season being ruled by the moon, having two full moons.
mhm. Yeah, I
It's,
know.
two
Yeah,
full moons in Capricorn. There is really this big, loud statement about taking responsibility for your feelings.
yeah, there is, and then taking the action that's, accorded to you, like sort of recognizing what you've stirred up, taking responsibility for it and moving forwards
Mm.
and, taking the steps. Like there's also a statement about, your patience and your persistence here. So taking those steps at the
Mhm.
Capricorn full moon, like this moment of time to sort of say, you know what, I need to actualize this thing that I've discovered about my feelings. I need to put a stake in the ground for it and just do that and
Yeah.
allow myself to see it and trust that I'm going to take an action to deal with it, to face it.
And and there's something really potent in this full moon as well, because if you think back to the new moon and the 2 weeks between the new moon and this full moon, that moon has gone through and picked up all the energy of all of the planets,
Yeah.
bar none, right? I
Mhm.
mean, it had to have also gone over Mercury and Venus and all of them. So it's like really full of a lot of emotions. There's a lot of emotion here.
Yeah. I always like how you do that because it's like being on a journey and then the moon being like, okay, take a little bit from all these
Right.
planets, Jupiter and Uranus and Mars, and kind of, and so on, and like folding that all into what exactly it is you need to take responsibility for at this full moon and having a moment of clarity about what that is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
except
what did you say? I'm sorry.
well, I just said the moment of clarity, and then I was like, "Oh, except by the
Oh,
way, the whole
except
thing's
for
squared
one.
by Neptune."
Yes. Yeah, one small detail around clarity is that with this full moon, it's square Neptune. That's a little bit tricky because Neptune is out of sign. An exact square would have to be to something in Aries, and Neptune is still in Pisces. Within a few days after this full moon, Neptune's going to go retrograde, so it's not going to go into Aries yet. It actually goes retrograde at 29:55 of Pisces. Here at the full
Yeah.
moon, it's at 29:54. So but it's a really tight square, but it is off sign.
So
That
interesting.
brings in
Yeah.
some confusion, some like there's a need to take action, but there's something in the way. There's something making it not clear. There's some challenge to it,
Yeah.
some
Yeah. I
fuzzy
mean,
challenge.
it's Neptune. Let's just talk about Neptune for a second. I mean,
Yeah.
Neptune introduces a component of mystery. It brings in something other than it seems, a confusion or a fog or an illusion or a dream. I mean, it can also bring in the collective unconscious
Yeah.
or consciousness in general. I mean, so there's this little keynote here of those themes that is kind of casting a spell on this full moon, where it's not as straightforward as you might want to think. And so there's definitely a statement here about having to surrender to something bigger than yourself, to surrender to some kind of imaginal or spiritual thing, or just the collective at large, like something that's totally out of your control. And yeah, it puts pressure on this. So it's almost a little bit like, do your work, do your due diligence, take responsibility of your feelings, but like having to take it with a grain of salt. Like you're not in charge or in control of what's
Right.
happening as much as you might think, because there is a cardinal sign full moon. There's this other element, and the fact that it's still in the mutable sign of Pisces, it just really continues to add that unknowingness, that mystery, that spell of like, I'm not quite sure, there's an
Right.
illusion or something
Right.
going on here I'm not quite sure about, and having to kind of just allow it. There's
Yeah.
nothing to be done but allow it.
Yeah. It's like
Uh,
things are supposed to be clear at the full moon, but whoops. Whoops,
Yeah.
it's not quite. It's just not quite clear. So yeah, that's really and that's really the only direct aspect that we've got here, isn't it?
Yeah, it just introduces this element, and I would just encourage you both think about this for your own lives, but also look at the popular culture. Look at the
Yeah.
things that are going on, the things that are like for sure going to happen, and then are they?
Whoops.
There's some other
Right.
element.
Right.
So there's
What
that.
happened? Yeah, Neptune. I just wanted to add one more word, one more keyword to all the great stuff you said is delusion.
Oh yeah, that's a good.
You know,
Yeah,
so there's that as well.
yeah. Yeah, and then the only other thing I have to add about this is just bearing in mind that the whole Cancer season, the moon is the ruler, the moon rules Cancer. So you're going to be looking to the moon for sort of like the directions on how to handle your feelings.
Mhm.
So at this full moon, the way to handle your feelings is to be serious and to take responsibility. But I mean, that's essentially it. I
And
guess
to
if you
take
take it,
time alone. And to take
yeah,
time alone. Yeah.
yeah. And the only thing I'll add to that picture, one more layer of astrology, is that the moon is Capricorn. So that means the moon is ruled by Saturn in this case. The only reason I'm mentioning that is because Saturn is by itself in this chart. It's unaspected. It's a wild card. So it kind of adds to that. I don't know. It kind of takes that Neptune square to the moon. It kind of just adds another layer of that. It sort of adds another layer of, okay, we still have this Pisces
Mhm.
confusion, but then there's this structure that's involved.
Mhm.
So it is, you still have to do the work of taking responsibility for yourself. Like, don't take the Neptune as a excuse to get off the hook. You're not off the hook.
Right. Right.
It's more just that you don't know the results of your action. You don't know any of it. You just have to keep doing the thing that you based on your feelings.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's all I
Yeah.
have
I
to add.
think spending this is not a full moon that you're going to want to go have a huge party and dance around a campfire. Sorry,
No.
sorry, folks.
Yeah.
But you might really want to just spend some time alone, really focusing on what the complexity of your feelings. Write some poetry.
Hmm.
Write some poetry. That's what I'll recommend. Okay.
Love it.
Now, are we ready to move on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Scoot out of here. Okay. All right, let's talk about this business on a personal level. So for those of you with Aries rising, this Capricorn full moon is shining its light right up there in your 10th house. The 10th house is the most public house. It has to do with your social reputation. It has to do with your profession. So it's really the way you show up at work, whatever your work is, even if you're a stay-at-home parent, you're showing up in your work. So that's what the Capricorn full moon is bringing up. It's illuminating, first of all, an area of life that is very serious for you. And it's encouraging you to take some sort of responsibility in your workplace or in your social reputation at this moment, to really get clear about what that is as best you can with the full moon. And then think about taking an action that you are holding yourself accountable for. The Cancer sun is down in your 4th house, really stirring up the very foundation of your emotions. There's a lot of feelings about your home life that are tied into that you have this whole season to really ruminate on and think on. And this Capricorn full moon is sort of saying, okay, great. Now take an action in this more public place. In a nutshell, that's what it's saying. When you add in the confusion of the Neptune planet here that we just talked at length about in the beginning of this video. Neptune is in your 12th house of your unconscious. So the reality is you're probably just going to feel confused and not quite sure, and you might have some kind of emotion come up over here and something over there and blah blah blah. Allow yourself at this Capricorn full moon to just kind of cut through that fluff and just take the action, the simple action that has to do with your social reputation in your workplace.
Yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways this is really simple. You probably have a lot of feelings about your home and family right now. You've got a lot of, you're really seeing how sensitive you are in that area, or how vulnerable you are to your family in some way. And yet, at the same time, you can't just go home and cuddle up under a blanket and feel sad about it or happy about it or whatever those big feelings are. You still have to go show up at your job or in some other social container there that you have to be responsible. And there's just such an awareness that you have, that you can really gather that awareness and figure out, what is your responsibility there, and what do you need to do at this
Yeah,
time, even in the face of the inner confusion. Okay.
yeah. And I just want to add one more thing and then we'll move on, but it's just the idea of the polarity here. That the polarity is, the natural tension between home and work life. And
Yeah.
that's where the fruitful information is in that tension between the two.
Yeah.
So that kind of just gives you a couple clues.
Yeah.
Add that.
Okay. So we'll move on now to folks who have Taurus rising. So if you have Taurus rising, this full moon is showing up there in your 9th house. Now, with a full moon, we're always looking at polarities. And the polarity here is between the 9th house and the 3rd house. Let's see. So let's talk about the 9th house. This is where there's an awareness, an illumination on what your responsibilities are in terms of your worldview, and maybe how you show up with an authoritative worldview. Now, I feel like I'm kind of coming at this in an odd way, but during Cancer season, there's really a focus here for those of you with Taurus rising. There's a focus on really understanding and working within the context of your sensitivity around how you use your voice. So there's some way in which your sensitivity, or how vulnerable you might feel around how you use your voice, is being reflected in how you hold your authoritative stance of your worldview.
Mm.
So that's really where there's a tension. There's always a tension in a polarity. So the tension here is between your worldview and how you how you speak of it, your communication in that third house. That third house can also bring in issues of siblings, neighbors, your neighborhood. So there's some way that there's a tension between how you use your voice, how your relationships with those particular people are, and how you take action with your how responsible you are to your own worldview.
Mm,
Now,
mhm.
within all of that, there's a bit of confusion. It's almost like, you have this sense of, I've got to take action. I've got to show that even in the midst of my sensitivity about how I use my voice, I have to show my authoritative worldview. And yet there's some way in which your community is causing you to pause in that, because there's some uncertainty maybe of how that authoritative voice is going to be received by your community.
Mm. Mhm.
It's interesting.
I know. I was thinking as you were talking, Laura, you really kind of bringing home to me, like when you think about these in terms of relationships, this moment in time about relationships, like, and you mentioned that the third house, has to do with siblings and neighbors. It also is like sort of relatives. It can be cousins and other relatives and so on and so forth. But the point is, it really refers to those family relationships that you have now. And during this Cancer season, there might be something coming up around vulnerability to do with siblings,
Mhm.
and relatives in some way. So if that's you, the other thing you want to think about is like when the full moon is in the ninth house, it's kind of bringing up almost like the wisdom of your elders. It's like the elders that kind of are instructing you. It's sort of like if you're having trouble with your siblings, think about how your grandparents might want to see it turn out. Like that it's just a way of adding in another layer, and I just
Hmm.
kept thinking about these family relationships here.
Hmm.
Um, and then when you throw in the Neptune, it kind of brings in this little spicy little confusion that has to do with your community. Because in some ways your family and your relatives and even maybe your grandparents might be part of your community, or they might not. The community might be totally separate. But there could also be some confusion here. There could be some confusion in the way family plays into your community that is kind of creating some consternation.
Hmm.
But at any rate, like I don't know, that just came to me, and
Hmm.
I really like how you really stress the whole. You've got to take responsibility for your worldview.
Yeah.
So if there is some kind of struggle that's going on in the family way, then it is your responsibility to open up your mind, to really be accountable to your viewpoints, and notice if they're being stodgy and curmudgeonly and not very gracious.
Hmm.
It just means that you're closing off to emotions on a certain
Hmm.
level. So
Hmm.
I don't know, just throwing that into the mix. But this
Into
is
the
a
mix. Yeah,
yeah.
it's interesting. For some reason, the kind of the images that come to my mind are really around taking responsibility, taking public responsibility. I don't know. I want to see somebody stand up at a school board meeting and take responsibility with their voice.
Yeah, I know,
Even
right?
in the
Because
face of the confusion
yeah,
from the community. There's something in
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, because the third house is learning, it's school,
Yeah.
it's your early education.
Right.
There's so many things in the third house, and to think
Yeah.
about
Your
what are
voice.
the vulnerabilities that emerge from that, or what way do your feelings tell you, inform that area of your life, and tell you what you
Yeah.
need to say. And then the Capricorn moon is like, and doing that with the full understanding of how that impacts the public and the collective and the
Yeah.
worldview. Yeah,
It's
that's a good
interesting.
example. Cool.
Okay, moving
All right.
on. Gemini rising.
Alrighty, so for those of you with Gemini rising, this full moon in Capricorn is illuminating the contents of your eighth house. And what is in the eighth house? Oh boy, I mean, the eighth house contains a lot, because the eighth house is really that place in your life where you have to manage and cope with the deeper layer of other people's attachments, other people's emotions, other people's values. the way other people handle their resources. I mean, this is just something you have to deal with. And as a Gemini rising person, this is a serious area for you and always has been. And this full moon is just illuminating that fact and just letting you know that, if you find yourself in those situations, it's like you really just need to lean into your ability to have boundaries here, to understand what boundaries you need to work with, so that you can be clear about where you end and all these other people with all their stuff, begin. You want to have some clarity. Now, I think the tendency here with Capricorn might be to throw up a wall when you don't want to deal with it, like out. That's not the question. A boundary, I mean, sometimes you have to throw up a wall if it's life or death, but most of the time in human relationships, we are not talking about walls. We are talking about delicate passageways that you need to kind of set and let move and change and work with in different ways. So that's what the full moon is illuminating, is that whole query around your boundary stuff and how you manage other people's very difficult things when they come at you. So that's kind of what it's highlighting during Cancer season. This is just absolutely bringing your own potential struggle about what you're worth, about your own values, about understanding, like, and you have a lot of emotional attachments to your values, but there's also a lot of power here as you understand what some of those issues might be, emotional issues around self-worth. You're really unleashing the power of recognizing your worth and embracing that worth and trusting that you can handle situations, because you are, you know who you are, your emotions, you're learning more about that during this whole Cancer season. So at the Capricorn full moon, trust that, take the action you need to take, whatever it is, whatever difficulties are rising and are coming at you, you got it, you can handle it. I mean, that's kind of the message, if you're paying attention. So there's that piece. And then the final thing I'll add in here is that we also know that Neptune, the planet of confusion and frustration perhaps, but also of clairvoyance, is hanging out in your 10th house. It's at the very, very end of your 10th house of profession. So that indicates to me that some of these boundary things that you're trying to figure out and owning your feelings has to do with some kind of problem in your public reputation, in your workplace, your profession, or in your sort of social reputation in general, or something in the public. It's also the source of potential liberation, as you kind of relinquish yourself to say, I don't have all the answers, I just know I need to set this one boundary. Oh.
It's interesting. It's like, yeah, there's a bit of confusion coming from that area of your social reputation, for sure, with that Neptune there. And just thinking of that polarity as, the Cancer, you may have a lot of sensitivity around money, resources. And, just thinking of the second house where the sun is, Cancer, as money, resources, and of course your self-worth under there, and the responsibility you have because of this sensitivity you have around finances, let's say, just as an example. Maybe you have a lot of sensitivity that you're really looking at around your own ability to make money or to manage it. And at this time, really seeing the responsibility of how you navigate other people's resources and money. There's something in here around that, I think, for a lot of people with Gemini rising. Yeah, there's such a serious way in which they approach other people's values, other people's money, resources. And yet there's that balance that has to be made between what's mine and what's yours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking, Laura, too, as you're talking, that in a lot of ways, the second and the 8th house are like the hidden layers of your relationship.
Yeah,
The first and the
exactly.
7th, it's self and other. Hi, it's me. But once you drop into the second and the 8th, right? They're hidden from view in the traditional sense in astrology from the ascendant, which represents the self. So these are like the hidden,
I
yeah, the
love
hidden
it.
layers of it. Yeah, hidden, this is where you bump into each other's stuff. And if you're not valuing yourself enough, or you've got, or you're struggling to learn about this, your partner's, stuff, well, this is just normal. This is just part of what we have to deal with.
Yeah.
But it's
I
how to
love
relate to
that.
people.
I think that's a great way to think about the second and the eighth as the hidden layers of you and the other.
Yeah.
And there is so much, you're so sensitive about your own stuff and you're so serious about the other's stuff. And at this point, there's really a give and take, and you really need to spend some time alone to contemplate these things and allow yourself to see where where there's a little bit of a confusion around what actions you have to take in terms of what boundaries you have to set or what requests you have to make of the other person, perhaps. But there's something from your social reputation that makes it hard to do so.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
Um,
Okay.
all right, let's move on to folks with Cancer rising. Oh, this is super personal for people, isn't it? People with Cancer rising, obviously, here we are, we're in Cancer season. The sun is right there in your first house. You are really, really aware of your own vulnerability. And a lot of this whole Cancer season is around looking at your vulnerability and understanding. And, we made the video recently about the Cancer season and, really understanding the power of vulnerability, the strength within your vulnerability. So, that's where the sun comes from. And the sun is reflecting on the moon at this full moon. So, what is being illuminated is your relationship, the seriousness with which you approach relationships, how, you know, relationship to you is serious business. And this is a period of time where you're really aware of how that seriousness reflects your own tenderness, your own sensitivity. So some action here on taking responsibility for who you are, how you show up in relationship, how you allow a partner to see your vulnerability. There's something in all of that you really are working with at this point in time. We've talked a lot about Neptune here and how Neptune is kind of giving us a little pause. We think things are clear. We think we know what action needs to be taken between us and our partner. And yet there's something coming from the area of your own higher wisdom or your own worldview that's making it a little unclear for you. Hmm. Not
Mhm.
sure how to think about that.
Well, because this one's mine, I can tell you that I am getting ready to go on a big old trip, and the ninth house is travel, and and it's the surrender
The
to
surrender.
this giant trip that I'm doing. It's the surrender to, I mean, I'm excited, but I'm also like a little trepidatious, So there's a little bit of just like, that's already been put in motion. I put that in motion a long time ago. And I could even argue years ago when I really think about what I'm doing and why I'm going.
Yeah.
But just, yeah, like having to kind of surrender. In any case, it's surrendering to the bigger picture, that there's something else that's already being put in motion and you're like kind of going, okay, and that there's a wisdom to it. It's a wisdom to it. It takes the load off, kind of takes the pressure off, and if you fight it and you try to, oh, I don't know want to do this, like that's where you're really going to get into trouble. So you just have to kind of move forwards on that
S-
serious thing that you're doing, packing my
So
bag.
So for you, packing your bags. So for you, Jenny, it's interesting to think about that as far as this sun and moon at this point being right there at the cardinal point. What's the action? What's the action of taking responsibility in partnership?
Yeah, I mean, this is the trip that I'm going on has to do with my family, my, kind of my end of things. And so there's a little bit of like, I do
Yeah.
feel a degree of responsibility of like, I'm bringing my partner to this,
Mhm.
and it's fine, but there's a little bit of like, I mean, it's actually been a good thing because it's been really like having to step up and be the planner. I'm not always the best planner, so doing the plans and executing the plans and doing the long-term
Okay.
layout of this whole thing, and then meanwhile, the whole Cancer season is so much about just, reckoning with my own feelings, my own emotions, my own sensitivities, or, and just kind of,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a great time to do a clearing house,
Yeah.
the whole season. And then this Capricorn moon is like giving you this, be like, well, how do you want to clear house? How do you want to, where are you not really quite sure you are emotionally that you're ready to step up and just do the thing, and take responsibility. So something like that.
Well, that's a great example. That's really a great example because in your particular situation, it really is. You are seeing how your sensitivity is reflecting in your responsibility. You kind of are responsible to make this work for your partner because it's about your family and your sensitivity. It's pretty
Yeah.
interesting. So this
Yeah.
could show up for people in similar ways, or it could, rather than a big travel, it could have something to do with an education that you feel like you have to, take responsibility in some way around your partner's um, yeah, some
Yeah.
responsibility there. So anybody with Cancer rising, yeah, Capricorn on the seventh house, it's like
Mhm.
relationship is serious business. And at this full moon, you're really seeing a place where you have to take
Yeah.
responsibility.
Yeah, or the Neptune could represent like a shift in your philosophy, which allows you to see where you need to step up in your relationship and maybe holds your partner accountable for something. I mean, the seventh house is you and who you are in partnership, but it can also mean your literal other person. Like it
Yeah,
might be that there is a way that they need to step up that you can see because you're kind of looking into their thing. So
yeah.
just keep
And
that in mind.
probably both.
Astrology does that. Yeah, probably some of both.
And probably some
So,
of both. Yeah.
yeah.
That's kind of how astrology works. It can work in on multiple levels and in multiple ways. It's
Yeah.
quite interesting. And you're going to have a fabulous trip, Jenny.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's move on to folks who have Leo rising.
Alrighty, so those of you with Leo rising, this Capricorn full moon is landing in your sixth house, and again, Capricorn is a serious sign. So there's an implication that you are fairly serious about your routines and your practices. And it can sometimes also be your work, your workplace, or training. Like this
Mhm.
can be training for things, training for work, training for a sports event, training for something to do with your health. I mean, there's a few different ways to look at this house, but those are some of them. So the Capricorn full moon is asking you to take responsibility for one of your routines or practices or something that you need to do to really support your health on a serious level or to support your ability to earn a livelihood. Those are some of the topics. Now, during Cancer season, the Cancer sun is in your 12th house. So this is deep, hidden behind the scenes work on your emotional content. This is getting to know some of those emotions that are kind of hidden away in your subconscious. And this is not the easiest place to have to get to know your feelings. I mean, there's almost like having to get to know your feelings through some sort of more universalized process, like needing to have a spirituality that can help you do that, or to have the therapy practice that helps you unpack those feelings. I mean, and every Cancer season you kind of get the same thing about this hidden stuff. And then the Capricorn full moon kind of almost like draws it out into this tangible, practical container. Like almost like, wow, I've been going through therapy and I've really come to this conclusion that I really need to go and do this silent meditation retreat. So
Yeah.
I'm going to book that retreat on this day. I mean, that's the kind of thing we're thinking about because a full moon is such a quick moment. And that's just an example. That may not be you, but the example of like taking action, taking responsibility, something in the tangible plane. So that's kind of that. And then to confuse matters, you also have the planet Neptune tightly squaring this axis. For you, Neptune is in the 8th house. Now, this is also a secret hidden place in your chart. It's that mysterious zone where you bump up against other people's stuff and you don't really know what you're bumping up against. So there's something that Neptune is stirring up here. And for you, it's particularly confusing and unknowable. I mean, it might be that there's another person in the mix, that has to do with this, or that is somehow confusing or adding a layer that's harder to get at. It could also just be like you just have to relinquish to the process. There's nothing else for it. I mean, that's all you can do is kind of out of that confusion, just pick the one thing that you can manage that has to do with your routines, the one tangible, practical Capricorn thing that kind of draws you out of that like sort of messy, confusing, unknowable process that's going on.
It-
So best of luck.
yeah, I'm thinking, when you were talking about, all that internal hidden sensitivity, and at this full moon, maybe, seeing that you need to sign up for that retreat, or you need to change your healthcare practices, or whatever it is, the action that you want to take. And yet, as you're thinking about taking that action, it's like, oh, I really have to contend with someone else's values too. It can't, that Neptune, it's like you with these with both of these luminaries at the full moon being on the cardinal point, there's an action to be taken. And yeah, it could be any number of things that have to do with taking responsibility for your health, or whatever, that 6th house responsibility thing that you need to set into motion. And yet there's something on that deeper hidden layer of relationship, the 8th house. There's something that's a little bit that gets in the way. Like, if I do this, is it going to mess up some other deeper level of a relationship? Having
Yeah.
having to navigate somebody else's opinion about it is really, that's where the confusion is, or that's where you have to, surrender to the fact that what decision you make may impact someone else.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, Laura, is what I was thinking of when you're talking about this is if you are that person who's maybe getting some therapy and you've made this decision about some retreat, what that 8th house Neptune could symbolize would be like kind of like the disapproval of your therapist,
Right.
or
Right.
some, like you just said, someone else's opinion, like
Yeah.
somebody, or you try to sign up at this retreat and there's something funny going on and you're like, I don't think that feels like a cult to me. I'm not doing that one. Like there's this other layer of something that you might have to kind of contend with in order to make the right choice for you. But certainly, I don't know, I've certainly had that experience where you feel like somebody else's baggage is coming in when you're trying to make a decision and you're asking for advice, and then their baggage kind of comes in the door. Instead of getting like clear advice, you get this weird something that the other person's dealing with. So just be on caution for that,
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
so interesting because Capricorn is all about making the decision for yourself. You
Yeah.
are the authority, you're going to make the decision. And yet Neptune's over there saying, well, you might be causing a problem or whatever.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to think about it.
Mhm.
Okay, let's move on to folks who have Virgo rising. So if you have Virgo rising, this full moon is happening in your 5th house. It's kind of funny. People with Virgo rising have Capricorn in their 5th house. That's kind of, I don't know. It's a difficult, wherever Capricorn is a place where we have to take responsibility in a serious way. And the 5th house is about fun and play and how we give of ourselves most openly and freely. And that's kind of an interesting mix because it's such a serious sign. So, at any rate, at this full moon, we are really looking at how we need to take responsibility for pleasure, for our creativity, for how we give of ourselves. And with Cancer, we're in Cancer season. We've just barely started Cancer season. So the focus is really of Cancer season is in your 11th house. It's how you receive from others. And we talked a lot in the Cancer season video about the power and strength of sensitivity, the power of vulnerability. And for people with Virgo rising, that vulnerability and sensitivity is in that 11th house. It's community, it's the community of people who support you. So this is where, there's always a bit of tension between polarities, and a full moon is always about polarities. So the tension is between how you give and how you receive from others. So there's some way in which you are really you're really aware of your sensitivity in community, and you are in a position here at this full moon of somehow really taking responsibility for how you give back. I think there's a lot of that. You are responsible for giving of yourself freely in some creative, loving way. Now, we talked a lot about Neptune and how it's kind of adding a little dose of magic or a little dose of confusion, or both, most likely both, to this little process here of scene where you have to, show up responsibly. So for you, that little bit of magic or confusion is coming from relationship. So in
Okay.
some way, you're trying to be responsible in giving love, but there's something I'm a little lost on that one, Jenny. What's the confusion coming from relationship?
I think it's a little bit more, I keep thinking about this one, the surrender to allowing your partner to support you,
Oh,
especially,
perfect.
right? I don't know. That's
Perfect.
what I was thinking of.
Yes, I was missing that word surrender. That's exactly what I needed to find. Yes, that's exactly it. In order to see where your responsibility and your sensitivity are going to line up and make something happen, that surrendering to um, allowing allowing others to support you. I think there's
Yeah.
something real in that.
I do. And, you said earlier in the video, just that whole thing about the Capricorn being old when you're young and young when you're old, and it is a little bit like the old man baby, or vice versa, like really getting younger as you get older. There's a great Ani DeFranco song about that, by the way. But I think this one's a really good one for that because, you have Capricorn in the fifth house, which is where the child energy is, the playful energy, the generosity. And so there is something about taking responsibility for growing younger as you age, and how do you do that? By tapping that playfulness, by making sure you're doing creative acts, and that's the way you're giving, by just laughing, humor, really enjoying that. And so I think there's something about that comes to mind here at this full moon, like getting in touch with that kind of elder wisdom and see how the elder wisdom relates to being childlike in a
Mm,
positive way that relates to play, being able to see the world through those eyes. So something about that. And I see the square here from the partner, especially because it's in the seventh house, which is a pretty strong house.
mm,
This really is like leaning into partners to help you see how to do that.
mm,
And
mm,
to, allow that support. I suppose there's other things you could see that as some kind of obstacle or problem or something, a way that the partner presents a burden, possibly too. I could see some scenarios for
yeah,
that,
yeah,
but I like the other one better. So
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Or the partner could just be in some way, there could be a sensitivity to showing your authentic playfulness.
Hmm.
I don't know. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Okay, I think
Yeah.
that's we've covered that good enough.
Okay.
Okay, so Libra rising.
Okay, so those of you with Libra rising, this Capricorn full moon is going to land in your fourth house. It's really illuminating the issues and concerns and matters of your fourth house. In a nutshell, those concerns are all about home. So that might mean your physical house, the land that you live on. It might mean your family members that you live with that make up your home, including children, pets, and so on. And it also refers to that more psychological layer of your own kind of emotional foundation that you are responsible for. So that's what this Capricorn full moon is shining a light on. Um, as a Libra rising person, there's definitely a suggestion that this is a very serious place for you, that you are very serious about your family and your home, and you may feel a lot of responsibility or weight around those issues. And that's what this Capricorn moon is showing you. I dare say, because it's the moon, that it might really be asking you to first and foremost look at how you manage your emotional foundation. The other issues are important too, but you've got to look at that component of it, I think, at a full moon. So just because of all the rulerships and so on. We're in Cancer season, for goodness sake. So, so anyway, those are some of the topics. Meanwhile, during Cancer season, we just made a video about the importance of embracing your feelings, of recognizing the power of kind of dealing with your own vulnerability and being willing to work with it and really understand it as a source of your power. So in this case, you've been working through for one day the emotional implications that have to do with your workplace. You may have to show vulnerability in your workplace during this Cancer season that you haven't before, or you may learn something new about the way you manage your feelings at work. Those are things that are kind of on the table during the whole Cancer season. The Capricorn full moon is really wanting you to look at how those emotions come into play as your emotional foundation, like your emotional wellness, your emotional balance, are things that really maybe have your attention. And rest assured that family members and issues of home will bring those issues up. So, if somebody's working on your house, it's probably kind of triggering. So lots of opportunities to work with things as they come up. So that's kind of the gist. It's that polarity between home and family, and the tug of war, the push and pull that you may feel between these two places, and how tightly they are connected. So meanwhile, that's all going on. And then you also have the square to Neptune to contend with during this full moon. Now, for you, that Neptune is at the very, very end of your sixth house of routines. So there might be some confusion about structuring your routines, or there might be a way that you need to just allow a little mystery about, how you're going to, do certain practices. I mean, I guess I think with Pisces in the sixth house, there's maybe some pressure to have to employ spiritual practices into your kind of daily routines, or that might be helpful if you don't have that. But at any rate, there's some kind of, I don't know, pressure or confusion or struggle around not really being able to kind of put down those routines, not being able to kind of have them nicely structured. So there's a need to kind of, I don't know, surrender to the wobble of not having that really well structured at this point while you're doing this kind of other work. I don't know. What do you think, Lori? What do you think about that?
Well, I was thinking about that, the sixth house, the Neptune piece might be really just bringing in the need to surrender to something around your health. There may be some health issue that you need to surrender to, or, you may have just gotten word that you have to change your diet in some way that you just need to surrender and do it. But, talking a lot about the sensitivity around your career, and just highlighting the fact that you might not have a career. It might be more just your social reputation. There's so much. Anyone with Libra rising, with Libra rising, there's that tendency to really want to show up as the person that can make things nice for everybody. And yet there's such a powerful vulnerability in how you're seen from the outer world, whether it be through a career or just your reputation in some way. And there's some way in which your social reputation is shining a light on the need to take some responsibility around your home and family, and some way of surrendering to some daily routine thing that is making that decision more difficult
Mm-hmm.
or harder to make, yeah.
Yeah. And I was having a thought too that I don't know, this chart's funny because it's sort of a flip-flop. You've got your emotions on top for all the public to
Right.
see, and then you've got this responsibility piece that's very much tied in with your home and family. And, it also could be that there might be a way that you need to, I don't know, almost allow other family members more responsibility. Like maybe you've taken too much responsibility
Oh,
and
I love that.
you need to, yeah, there's a little bit of a turning on its head here, like that maybe it's time to, go ahead and let the kid take the car, or, maybe there's some way that you being a bit too controlling about how you handle your home life. And this could be an opportunity to do the opposite, to recognize, oh, I actually need to delegate responsibility, and that would be another way of looking at this that I think could be really helpful. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I like that idea. Just the importance of um, not taking on all the responsibility,
Yeah, like sharing it somehow, or
ta delegating it somehow, not jumping on the plane and going to save the children who are in their 50s now. Anyway,
yeah, okay,
I'm not speaking to anyone directly there.
yeah,
Okay, we're going to move on. We ready?
yeah. I think you're ready.
Okay, folks with Scorpio rising. Okay, so this puts the full moon, the Capricorn full moon, in your third house. So this really focuses our attention here on how you use your voice. I think of the third house. The third house is really, it's it's our communication
Mhm,
style, it's how we communicate, our day-to-day processes of the mind. It's also in terms of relationships, it brings in siblings, neighbors, cousins, those kind of, yeah, I think of it as the relationships that we didn't choose. We don't choose our siblings, we don't choose our cousins or our neighbors, generally speaking. But this is an area, and it's through those relationships that we learn our communication skills. That's kind of how these things are come together there in the third house. Um, Anyone with Scorpio rising has this is a very serious area. This
mhm,
is an area where you really need to take responsibility for how you respond in those relationships. You really need to be an authority of your own way of speaking, your own way of expressing yourself. And at this point, it's really, it's the moon here. So it's your emotional expression that's really being highlighted.
mhm,
Now, meanwhile, we are in Cancer season. We've only been there a day when the Capricorn full moon happens, but Cancer season, which hopefully you listened to that video as well, but the focus of Cancer season for you, with those of you with Scorpio rising, is up there in the ninth house, and you have a lot of sensitivity in that area. The ninth house is it's really the area where we learn our bigger understanding of the world. We can think of that house as the house of our worldview and all the things that make up our worldview: travel, education, religion, all of these things that kind of come together to create our worldview are part of that area. So those of you with Scorpio rising have a lot of sensitivity there. And that's that polarity between the third and the ninth house is where there's some stress with this full moon. There's some stress there. Like, how do you authoritatively express yourself, given the sensitivity of your worldview. You can see how that can be difficult.
Mm.
Okay. So in the midst of this, and with these luminaries both being at the Aries point, it's like there's a push and a stress to take action, to speak up about your worldview, perhaps. And yet, before we went into the individual impacts, we talked a lot about Neptune's square to this polarity. That brings in a little bit of pause, like there's a push to take action, to speak up in an authoritative way, and yet there's a pause on that. You're not quite sure about how to do that or how you should do that. That kind of confusion, or the thing that's getting in the way, somehow relates to how you give of yourself. So it comes from that fifth house. So there's some way of, you might feel like there's some confusion there. There's some confusion in how you give love, that maybe if you really speak up the way you feel pushed to, it may be really confusing issues with people that you love.
Mm.
Could be as
Mhm.
simple as that.
Yeah, and I was thinking here that that could be a helpful thing, like having Neptune in your fifth house of creativity and play, where you just kind of have to surrender to that,
Yeah.
like you just, right? Like you just have to kind of, I don't know, that's what was this one.
Yeah.
It's funny. In some of them, I think Neptune can really present more of an issue. In some of them, it could be more of a helping hand of surrender to a creative process, surrender to just having play while all this serious learning is going on where the Cancer and Capricorn are.
Or you might simply have to surrender to the fact that your children aren't going to like what you say.
That's right. Well, this one's funny to me because this really brings in the water trifecta, where you've got I mean, even though Neptune's squaring, it's still in Pisces, and then the sun is in Cancer, and you're a Scorpio rising person. So you're walking around with water as your kind of front line of how you make first impressions and how you deal with other people. So there's kind of this intensity, and water is like very powerful, but it's kind of unknowable and mysterious, and yet it can just pull you in all these different directions. There's a lot of potential for flow here. And in a lot of ways, I think that Capricorn full moon just kind of highlights the practicality that you do have, and meanwhile, you're this water person who's flowing along or making puddles along, however, whatever's going on in your life. And maybe this Capricorn full moon gives you this moment to really go, gosh, what do I really need to say? And actually feel like you have some structure around that for once, and that you actually can really see how you can wield that voice, as you talked about so eloquently. So there's something, yeah, I don't know. That's what came to my mind, is just that really this is a watery time. You're kind of used to water, probably as a Scorpio rising person. That depends on your chart.
Yeah.
But anyway, so
Yes. I
yeah,
just want to add one more thing. You said
yeah,
flow. You said flow. Then you said making puddles, and it also could be making waves.
right.
Anyway,
Yeah, there's
moving right
lots
along.
of ways to think about water.
Lots of ways to think about water. Okay, dripping. Okay,
I know.
moving on to folks with Sagittarius rising.
All right, so Sagittarius rising folks, this Capricorn full moon lands in your second house. The second house has to do with resources. It has to do with your financial resources. It has to do with your emotional resources, or even the physical resources of your body. There's a lot of different things about all of that. So there is a seriousness in which you handle this. It might be that you've had to be fairly serious about money, or you may have been hard on yourself in your life with Capricorn here, like on your own self-esteem and the way you value yourself. Those are all kind of topics in the hot seat. And this Capricorn full moon is just serving to illuminate wherever you are in your life with regards to money, with regards to self-worth. So that's the first thing to take on board. And really that you need to take some kind of responsibility here at the full moon. And that could just be one small step. We're just talking about a point in time. So it isn't the whole thing. It's just one thing that you need to do to take responsibility. So keep that in mind while also recognizing that we are in Cancer season. There is the need to reckon with one's vulnerability, to really see the power of being in touch with your feelings. And for those of you with Sagittarius rising, this is especially true because your ability to stay in touch with your feelings is what gives you the capacity to both have boundaries with other people's difficult stuff, but also have compassion and be sensitive and sympathetic to other people's difficult things. In fact, you of all people, Sagittarius rising, have the ability to be incredibly nurturing and sensitive towards other people's very difficult issues. The question is more about how you manage that. You've got to be, good inside yourself. You've got to manage your own feelings in order to be able to do that. And that's what the whole Cancer season kind of shows you. And then the Capricorn full moon really gives you this moment in time to do something very tangible and practical that has to do with you valuing yourself. That's the bottom line. Now, the other little piece in this picture, the little snag or the unknowable or the mystery, is that Neptune is also tightly squaring this polarity, the full moon polarity. And for you, Neptune is in your 4th house. So that means that there is a confusion or a mystery or a totally imaginative way of being that concerns your home life that impacts your finances. It impacts the way you deal with other people's emotions or resources or money. There's no question it impacts it. I think the question is more about how. What might Neptune be doing? What pressure might it be exerting on you? I mean, the first one comes to mind is, well, if you have kids, I mean, kids cost money. So there's something about your financial things that that you're having to, maybe you didn't take that on board, way back when you decided to have a baby. And that's okay, because now you're having this moment in time to work with that. Just one example. I'm going to let you talk now, Laurie.
It's funny. I am just looking at this and thinking about that, and again, with that Neptune in your 4th house, so late in that 4th house, but there may be just some way in which you really need to surrender to some family issue. There's some family issue that is creating a challenge or yeah, this one's kind of tricky for me for some reason. But there is a responsibility. There's an action that you're feeling the need to take some action around money or resources, I would say, that comes from your understanding of your own sensitive nature toward other people's stuff. And yet maybe there's a family member that feels like they have some say in how you spend money. There could be something along those lines, and you may need to just surrender to the fact that you can't keep everybody happy. With Capricorn in that 2nd house, whatever it is, whatever action you're feeling you need to take around your resources in some way, it's a solitary path. Capricorn is always a solitary path. And if there's some family issue that feels like it's trying to pull you in a different direction than the direction you feel you need to make, just keep that mountain goat in mind, that the Capricorn has to take action on its own understanding of integrity.
Right. So it's almost like when you're talking, it made me think of, it's almost like you might need to have more compassion for some family member that needs something from you and incorporate that into your solo venture. You can't ignore it. It's got to be part of it. But I hear you. It's not about dissolving into collective stuff. It's like still taking that action solo that you're needing to make, but you might need to incorporate something unexpected that has to do with your family, your home, the land you live on, so on.
Yeah. I think that's really good. Yeah, you can't like disregard it.
Yeah.
But you also, it's ultimately yours to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
I
Covered
think
that
that
one.
makes perfect sense. It's clear as
At
can
least
be.
to us.
Right. Okay. So here we have folks with Capricorn rising. So this is for those of you with Capricorn rising, this full moon is a very personal full moon, as will the next one, because it is also a Capricorn full moon. But at any rate, here we have an opportunity, those of you with Capricorn rising, to really take responsibility for who you are. And really, at this full moon, here we are in Cancer season. We've just started Cancer season. The focus of the season is on relationship for you. You are really in a position of looking very clearly at that polarity between the first and the seventh house. It's so interesting how a person with Capricorn rising is such a serious personality. I remember, yeah, anyway, I'm about to go off on a riff and I'll try to avoid it. But there's such a seriousness around how you show up in the world. You're not a frivolous person. You're a very serious, practical, pragmatic person in the world. And when it comes to relationship and what you need in intimate partnership, you need that flip side, that Cancer, that extreme sensitivity. And so, here in Cancer season, you're really understanding the power in your vulnerability to partner or partnership. And because these two luminaries are right at the Aries point, there's some action that you're feeling called to do, some action regarding your personality, something that's going to really impact how you show up in the world. And yet that action that seems very clear gets a little foggy because of the Neptune interaction here that we talked about earlier in the video. So there's some way in which your communication isn't quite clear. It may be difficult. It may be that you really need to look at how your personality, your strong authoritative personality, is being seen by your partner. You may really want to look at how your communication and really bring in a more spiritual component in your communication, really surrendering to some, maybe a conversation that needs to happen here. I'm going to turn this one over to you. I feel like I'm muddling around in it, not quite getting to the core.
How Neptune of you.
How Neptune, yeah, you start talking about Neptune and we
Well,
get foggy.
I was just thinking about how, that the full moon is demanding the action that takes that you are taking your own authority, that you're, recognizing that you are an authority, you have a strategy, you have a method for asserting yourself in the world in a very structural way. And you might have that clarity about what action you need to take to do this. Maybe it's something, it could be any part of your life, because this is the first house of self. It could be something that's happening in your family, at your workplace, or somewhere totally different than that. But what is confusing is you don't know how to talk about it. Like, you don't necessarily know what to say to do the thing, how to present yourself. And with Neptune being in that third house, that maybe it's not about what you say. Maybe it's just about how you walk in the room, like walking in the room, like you have your little internal voice, your hidden internal Neptunian voice saying, you got this, you got this, you know how to do this, and not worrying about, oh, I don't have the speech memorized, or I don't know exactly what I'm going to say to the boss. Who cares? You've got it. And I think it's something about, there's a self-trust, self-compassion, that your voice is going to be whatever it needs to be, and really relinquishing that. And that's how I see it.
Yeah. I like that. I
Yeah.
like that. Really trusting that what comes out is going to serve the situation.
Yeah, 'cause I dare say, I was having a conversation with someone recently who has Capricorn rising, and this person is female identified, so this might be also specific to that. But just the idea that they have a really hard time getting taken seriously in their workplace, even though they are
Ah,
the most knowledgeable person in the room, they know what they're doing, they know what they're saying, and they have a really hard time. And so this is something about like just doing it anyway. Who
yeah,
cares? You
yeah,
know, I mean, just even if you do care, you have to kind of adopt the who cares attitude in order to just do it because you really have it. You
yeah,
really do have it.
yeah.
So, but it's easy to get challenged. And I remember, yeah, that conversation was pretty illuminating. So,
Capricorn rising people are just, they come into the world so mature and adult. You know, it's
yeah.
an interesting rising sign. Okay, let's move on to folks who have Aquarius rising.
Okay, so those of you with Aquarius rising, this full moon that's in Capricorn is landing in your 12th house. So the 12th house, that's a pretty hidden house. I'm the most hidden house in the whole shebang here. So this Capricorn full moon is asking you to take responsibility for your own subconscious patterns in some way. And again, the full moon is just a moment in time. It's a spot in time. So you're just thinking about almost kind of cutting through so much confusion with it being in the 12th house here and just taking that one action that you know you need to take in order to take responsibility. So that's what the kind of the full moon is representing, really hidden behind the scenes, need to establish some authority.
Mm,
So to shed a little more light on what that might mean, let's talk about Cancer season. We have really talked about this Cancer season as this moment to, or excuse me, this time period to really work with your emotions and to notice feelings that are coming up during your regular routines. The sixth house is your routines, your practices, anything you do to kind of prepare for work,
mm,
so this could be trainings and things like that. But in any case, you're really being asked to work with your feelings on this day-to-day
mm,
lifestyle level. And that's where the background is. And then the Capricorn full moon is kind of like, okay, you need to kind of act on these feelings and sort of plunge forwards and take responsibility for yourself in some way. Because it's the 12th house, it could be very hidden. Only you know you've taken responsibility. On the other hand, the 12th house can be massive collective concerns. So you might be someone who works in a high-powered corporate job or something like that, where you really are pulling some levers behind the scenes there.
mm,
So
mm,
pretty wide breadth here this can
mm,
happen
mm,
in. The other piece of information, if you're still kind of scratching your head, like, I don't know what this is, you're in the right place because the other issue is that Neptune is involved. Neptune kind of casts a spell on this whole situation. And in your case, Neptune is just hanging on in the very last bits of your second house. So there might be some confusion that has to do with your finances or a confusion that has to do with not being able to value yourself fully or not really understanding how you value yourself. And that's playing into the whole kerfuffle about, I'm not really sure what action to take. That in
mm,
my mind, with the Aquarius rising, that's going to be the big question here is what is it? What do you need to take authority about? Like, what do
mm,
you need to strategize about? What tangible act can you take here?
mm.
So with that, I'm going to boot it over to you, Lori.
Well, I don't know. I'm just looking at it, thinking about, for some reason, right from the beginning of this one, I really thinking about, oh my gosh, what would it feel like to have Cancer in the sixth house? To
Mm,
wake up every day and have your day-to-day routines just, you know, being such a place of so much sensitivity. And
mhm,
then, yeah, what is the action that sensitivity is asking you to take responsible action for your own internal subconscious understanding of yourself.
mhm,
It's like, well, maybe it's time to study astrology to really learn to take responsibility for understanding yourself. Maybe it's time to take on some deep psychological study or something along those lines. That's what I was thinking of. I'm just, for some reason, while you were talking, I was just lost in this idea of what would it feel like to have Capricorn in the 12th house or to have Virgo in the 8th house? It's fascinating to kind of contemplate that with, you see people with Aquarius rising and they show up in a certain way. And yet to really imagine what it's like to have these placements is really
Yeah.
fascinating.
Well, I think it does help kind of shed a light too on the idea of like, yeah, when you're dealing with your emotional currents on a day to day, and it's so changeable. I mean, this is why the moon represents the, Cancer in a lot of ways, because it changes all the time. It's always in a new sign. So
Right.
there is the need to kind of work with the tides of one's emotions. And it does
Yeah.
speak to the idea of trying to create a container that is based on the unknowable, that is based on the 12th house. I mean, I just think right away, like having a strong spiritual practice is a way of describing this. It's not the only way to handle this area of your life, but it is a way of describing, the push and pull of the daily practice where you sit down and you ground and you do all these things, and then having that container for like what's the overarching beliefs that you hold or faith that you have in life. I mean, it really brings in, these are deep areas of life, and also they're learning areas. These are two areas of life where you're always going to be learning something new. It is never
Yeah.
going to be finished with the learning.
Yeah.
So yeah.
All that day-to-day sensitivity, and yet such a cool, objective rising sign.
It's necessary.
Nobody knows those deep, sensitive undercurrents that you go through every day.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to move on to folks with Pisces rising. If
Mhm.
you have Pisces rising, then this full moon is showing up there in your 11th house. So for folks with Pisces rising, the 11th house, the 11th house is your community. It's the like-minded people that support you to your desires. It's not friends, although friends can be part of the community that's represented here, but it's really, yeah, it's the people that support you.
Mm.
So this is a really serious area for you. You take community very seriously. You feel very responsible for having that area of your life figured out in some way to be an authority within that area. So this is what's really being illuminated at this time. And what we need to think about here is this is just at the very beginning of Cancer season. So the highlight of the season itself is in your 5th house. So this is this polarity between the 11th and 5th, which is one of my favorite polarities. The 11th house is where we receive from community. The 5th is where we give of ourselves most authentically. So if you have Pisces rising, this is the 5th house is where Cancer season is. This is an area where you're incredibly sensitive. And in our Cancer season video, we talked a lot about the power of sensitivity. But you've got a lot of sensitivity in how you give of yourself. And that sensitivity is being reflected into the need to take action in the area of community. So that stress between those two areas is asking for a action. So what's the action? The action is in some way being responsible or accountable to the community. That's interesting to think about that. And, we talked a lot about Neptune being in a square to this, kind of getting in the way or causing some lack of clarity in what the action is.
Mhm.
For you, Neptune is in the 1st house. So it's something very personal, some way that you want to be seen in the world, or some way that people do see you in the world that is creating a little, okay, so possibly there's some way that you really want to take some responsibility in community, and yet people don't see that strength in you.
Mm, mhm.
Because you show up with that Pisces, which looks pretty dreamy, and, it might not be taken seriously. There may be some element where it's easy for you to at least feel like you're not being taken seriously in
Mm,
that way.
mhm.
Hmm.
I think this one again as a water rising sign, it really goes well with the theme we talked about, the Cancer season theme of really understanding and respecting the power of water.
Yeah.
Because you're right, like you
Yeah.
walk in the room with that Pisces rising, you might kind of get a lot of like, oh, like that's sweet, like and bullshit. Like it's it's just not. I mean, Pisces is the ocean. I mean, the ocean. We don't even we understand space more than we understand the ocean.
Right.
So, just to kind of say like, yep, and having, I mean, we haven't talked about this really, but just whatever. Saturn is in your first house as well as Neptune. So, in other words, this has been a long process for you and going ahead and like being like, yep, I'm going to be taken more seriously. And you've been doing it. You mean stepping it up and then but once you get kind of past that, I think this is a really awesome one because it's kind of like the way you give of yourself is from your heart, from
Mhm.
your core emotions, really showing up and giving of yourself. But then you're like the authority in your community. And I mean, who do you want to be the authority in your community? I mean, I want somebody who has showed up for themselves and their own feelings and their own emotions and then are able to be this authority and speak from this place of knowing the deal,
Mm.
knowing their vulnerability, like, having reckoned with those difficult things like that
Mhm.
to me
Yeah.
is something I really like seeing that Capricorn in the 11th house for this one. It really just says, and this Capricorn full moon just making a statement about how do you want to show up for your community? And there's probably something going on that you're going to in this moment of time, but just in general,
Yeah.
um, really highlighting that. So,
Yeah. And
good.
I don't know, as you're talking about it, I'm just thinking about that Cancer in the fifth house and the creativity of the fifth house and bringing that creativity and that open-hearted creativity into, bringing that to the community in a serious way, and
Yeah.
allowing you to trust in that softer side of yourself with that Neptune, surrendering
Mhm.
to, whatever people think of you, regardless of what people think of you, how they see you. When it
Yeah.
comes to community, you have that authoritative energy and it will be seen soon enough.
Yeah.
People do
Yeah.
see
And
beyond the rising sign.
yeah, and just I was also thinking about the strength of being able to be tender towards children.
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
really doing that is really a measure of a strength of a society.
Wow.
Is that how do you tend to the vulnerable?
Yeah.
And so I don't know, there's something about this one that really speaks to
Yeah.
that. I really like
That's
it.
awesome. Okay.
Okay.
Um, Anything else you want to say about that?
No, I think we've done it.
All right, we've done it. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. We will be making another full moon Capricorn one soon.
We shall. Yeah.
We
All right. Thank
shall
you,
indeed.
everybody. Thank you, Lori.
Okay, bye-bye.